All right. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we are going to listen to a presentation about a real-life museum disaster that my colleague Todd Topper experienced when he was working in Colorado. Todd is the senior manager for collections at the Minnesota Historical Society. His work focuses on collections management and registration, and he's worked everywhere from Indiana to Georgia to Colorado to Ohio to Minnesota, our very favorite state. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Todd's experiences, and especially hearing about the lessons that he learned during this experience and how they've changed his approach to disaster planning and stuff in museums. This program is being brought to you by the Minnesota Alliance for Heritage Response, which is a statewide network of people who are interested in museums, archives, libraries, and a lot of other cultural heritage type organizations and emergency responders who are all interested in preparing for and responding to disasters and emergencies that affect collections and historic properties. We're planning to have similar presentations like this that go over real life events that people have experienced a couple times a year, and this is our very first one. So I'm really excited to kick it off with Todd. And I will share the link in the chat to join our directory for the Minnesota Alliance for Heritage Response in case you didn't get an invitation to this event through that directory. You can join us and we will send you more invitations like this in the future. And other than that, I'm going to pass it on to Todd to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. I feel honored that I'm the first one out of the gate to do one of these presentations. This year marks my 30th anniversary in the museum field. And as Megan was saying, I've worked all over the country, mostly in state historical societies. In Colorado, I spent 15 years at the Colorado Historical Society, now doing business as History Colorado. And during that 15 years, I was registrar and director of collections management. And I'll share a series of slides with you. Just a little caveat though. So a year ago at the MOM meeting, me, Megan, some other people were talking about disasters, and I was talking to them about the disaster that I had been a part of. And she said, it would be great if you could come and share that with this group. And so as I was pulling photos together, I realized in the moment, I didn't take that many photos. So in the presentation, you'll see some photos that I've cribbed just off of the internet, and then I'll let you know when we're looking at photos that I actually did take. But one of the lessons learned, and this is before nice cell phones with nice cameras, but in the moment, you should, take as many documentation photos as possible because you may need them in the future. So that's the first lesson learned. So now I am going to share my presentation. And bear with me here. I need to turn on, let's see. Okay, what am I doing wrong here? Okay, so I think you guys can all see this. All right, so the first slide is the old History Colorado building. So in 2007, we learned that the State Judicial Department, which is this big box of a building on the backside of our city block, wanted to build a big 600,000 square foot judicial facility on our block. So we received notice that we were being kicked off the block. Here's $25 million, go find somewhere else. And we had a number of years to prepare for the move. And I was responsible for preparing and packing and procuring a place to move to. So in 2010, 2009, 2010, we ended up packing up everything. So about 200,000 objects, 8,000 linear feet of manuscript material, a lot of motion picture film, kind of a standard state historical society collection. Not enormous, but not small by any degree. So we hired a boatload of people in 2008, 2009, 2010. Great time to hire out of work museum people. And we moved everything off-site. We went shopping for an off-site storage warehouse. And if you recall, what happened in 2008 and 2009 is that the economy crashed, real estate market tanked, and it was honestly, it was a great time to be in need of warehouse space. We went into a lease for this property that you see in front of us. It's roughly 52,000 square feet. Not a new facility, had been a pharmaceutical packaging place. It had been a printing warehouse and manufacturer. So what we were looking for was about 50,000 square feet with high bay and low bay, limited dock penetrations, with heating and cooling if we could get it. So good, reasonable HVAC, and a building envelope that we could secure. And after looking at maybe 10 facilities, some of them upwards of 100, 200,000 square feet, we landed on this one, and we ended up buying it for roughly $2 million in North Denver. And it took, I don't know, 3 or 4 months to prep the space, buy racking, and we started moving collections in between, January through April of 2010. And one of the selling points of this property was its location to the local police precinct and also fire station. So our warehouse is the upper arrow, right here, if you can see my cursor, and the police station is the lower arrow. So kind of across the block and down, just almost a stone's throw away, you've got the police station, which was just awesome for our security needs. So to back up a little bit, so now by April of 2010, nearly everything that the museum owns that is not at one of the satellite museums is in this 52,000 square foot warehouse. Oh, and let's go back a little bit. So there's a low bay space with roughly, 14-foot ceilings. And then there's a high bay block, which is about a 30-foot ceiling. So I think we put 16-foot racks with that, and then we put crates that could go up higher, so about 20 feet. And then we put mixing, air ceiling fans, and it's rather nice. And this is that high bay space before we put racks in. So we just bought industrial high bay racks and kind of outfitted it like a Home Depot or a Costco, enough to bring forklifts down. I decided early on that all of the collections would be palletized and, boxed, palletized, and shrink wrapped, because we just didn't know how long our new building would take to construct, and would the new building accommodate. I think we already knew that the new building would not accommodate all of the collection. So a certain amount of the collection would stay in the racked space. And there's a little diagram of racking, the racking diagram that we did. And that's roughly 20,000 square feet or so. And here's a photo of what the containered, the packaged collections look like. So not terribly accessible, but that was okay. but accessible enough that we did a 100% inventory with inventory sheets on the outside. So given 2 or 3 hours, if we were looking for one particular object, we could pluck that pallet with a forklift down and bring that object out. We also had a number of massive crates for big stone tools like manos and metates, big archaeological features, as well as rolled textiles. They went into very long crates. And here's 2 of our contract people showing you how, they retrieved the objects from the racks. So, like I said, April 27th, 2010, the last pallet went in. And then between 2010 and the fall of 2011, almost to 2012, we built this building in downtown Denver. So a 4-story with 4 stories with the basement, purpose-built vaults, about 30,000 square feet of vault space. But as we suspected, a big portion of the collections would not go into the new space and would stay out at the offsite warehouse. Collections started a reverse process of coming back into the space, wheeled down hallways, and onto shelves. And that process was completed in April of 2012. So almost 2 years to the day of when we vacated the first building, the old building. So in fall of 2012, so now we're proceeding 6 months after we've moved stuff into the building. We still have racks full of collections material in that high bay space, and a fair amount of stuff in the low bay space in the warehouse. So at 5 o'clock in the morning in September, and also I should say, it was a time when everybody but me went to the Mountain Plains Museums Conference. So most of the collection staff, administrators, they were in another state at the conference. So I receive a phone call at 5:30 in the morning from my security guy, who received a phone call from the police department. So during shift change, one of the cop cars was going by our warehouse to the station, and he saw water pouring out of the dock doors. And it was September, it's in Denver, so it's cool at night, and the water was steaming. So it was coming down like a waterfall, and the steam was rising, and they thought that was unusual, and they called our security guy. So the cop car is going down the street right in front, and these 3 dock doors, there was water coming out and creating these plumes of steam out into the parking area. So I jump out of bed, and I was only 10 minutes away. So I meet our security guy. We go into the building, and at this point, we do not have full-time security. We had full-time security before we started to move out into the new building, and then due to budget constraints, we stopped that security presence, that live person in the building. So we enter into this corner where the shipping containers are, and this is what we see. There's about 2 inches of water throughout the warehouse. Keep in mind, the floor plan, the footprint is 52,000 square feet. So it's a big space. And it looks like we're walking through, the Amazon, because the water is warm It's damp, it's steamy. There are bubbles coming up through the cracks in the floor. There's a current. There are little ripples where the mud is coming up through the cracks in the floor and creating this little like a stream bed. Now, so one of the lessons learned, another lesson learned is I had everything 4 inches off the ground. Either everything was on a pallet or on a pallet rack or on a crate with cleats, 4-inch cleats. So, you know, we walked, did the loop around the high bay and the low bay. And, you know, I thought, oh, this could be worse. I mean, it's going to take a little cleanup, but no objects have been hit. Here's another image of going in from the low bay to the high bay space. So this railing is protecting this stair steps down to the exit. So the exit door is sealed so well that it's, created this little hot tub of water. You can also see the ripples in the reflection of the water traveling from the low bay space to the high bay space. So there is some current happening there. What we found out, let me back up. What we found out is that there was a water main starting in the middle of the street and going kind of underneath the dock doors. And it came up to the main level of the floor, close to the exterior wall. And we learned that water main had failed. It rusted through and created a kind of a high pressure geyser. So between the wall, there was a crack between the floor slab and the wall where this spurting geyser of mud and warm water was jetting up about 10 feet into the air and creating a kind of a muddy mess in that area. That was an area where we had some archaeological site files, but they were far enough away that the boxes were splattered, but they really didn't get hit with the water. So we really didn't have any losses there. But a tremendous amount of water was geysering up. What we didn't know, what we didn't see, was that there was also a pool of water. And I had been in this warehouse. I left, I ended the previous day at 4:30 in the afternoon. Everything was fine at 4:30. So sometime between 4:30 in the afternoon and 5, so roughly 12 hours, something happened and the water was gushing for a very long period of time. What we didn't know was that there was a lake forming underneath the concrete slab. So we had water on top of the slab and we had water below the slab. As the security guard, Steve, and I were wandering through, we heard something that sounded like a car crash on the other side of the warehouse. Steve looked at me and said, "We need to get out of here." And we walked around outside to the other side of the building, and this is what we saw. So what we learned later was that the lake that had formed underneath the concrete slab had created enough pressure that it pushed out the cinder block wall on the alley side of the building. It just sort of blew it out, and this gush of mud and water spewed out into the alley. The cinder block wall was holding up the roof, and so the roof collapsed. And what you can't see is that we had a line of vehicles along this wall. We had a World War II tracked vehicle called a Weasel. We had a 1910 Fritchley electric automobile. The Fritchley car, I think I've got a slide of that. I've got a slide later. The Fritchley car was made of mortised and tenoned 4x4 posts, creating this kind of wooden cage. that was supported by the metal chassis. So it was holding up about 6,000 pounds of roof all by itself, which is pretty amazing. So the car received a little bit of damage. The tracked vehicle was received a little bit of damage, and I think we had a horse-drawn carriage that received a little bit of damage. But it looks bad. But aside from a little cosmetic damage from some vehicles, we did pretty well here. Here's an aerial view of the damage. The day or two later, you can see on the roof line the crack in the roof where the roof has kind of gone down a little bit, and you can see the mud that has spewed out. There are railroad tracks that are right next. They go through the alley, and it has completely covered the railroad tracks. You can see the tide line into the parking lot next door where the water had spewed out. You could also see the mud on the front side of the building that came out through the loading dock doors. And it looks like the water hasn't completely dried up yet. So, of course, our security guard, Steve, he called 911. We got an immediate response from police and fire. Denver Fire Department showed up, put the caution tape all the way around the building, and then waited for a building engineer. They did an initial walkthrough with the firefighters did to determine. So they cut the power, they cut the water, but they couldn't cut the city water. They couldn't cut. So this water main was used for the sprinkler system. It wasn't for domestic water. So they couldn't find the shutoff. This guy is not our police chief, but he looks just like the guy that I met with. So anyway, they've got the fire tape that went up. So they had to call in the city because they couldn't figure out how to shut off the geyser of water. And it took about 2 hours for the city crew to show up. And they determined that the last time the road had been paved, they paved over this little cap in the middle of the street. So they had guys with these bars breaking the asphalt so they could get to the shutoff before they could really do a thorough assessment of the building. And up until this point, we're kind of waiting on the sidelines thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to condemn our building. And what happens to the collections? So this is not our picture. This is one I cribbed from the internet, but it's essentially what it looked like. They had to break into the street to uncover that metal plate, take off the plate, and then find the valve to turn off the water. So here's another image of that same morning before the fire department, before they killed the power. What they were really worried about was structural integrity of the high bay space. They were really worried that another wall would collapse. So they met with a city engineer and walked through the space. And later that morning, this is three or 4 hours later, we found out that the building was safe to enter. Oh, there's the Fritchley automobile. So this car was holding up this part of the building. It's kind of amazing. There's a little crystal lamp. This was a very fancy automobile. There's a little crystal lamp that was damaged that had to be replaced. But really, that's and some paint scratches. But that's really the only damage. And we later installed this car at the New History Colorado Center once we were able to get the roof off of it and to move it away. Okay, so some lessons learned before I go into other images. I learned that our security guy had previously put Belfour Environmental in a speed dial list. They already had a state contract. They were covered by our insurance. So once we had permission from the fire department to enter the building, Steve called up Belfour. They arrived in trucks like this, and also a power generation truck with giant generators because the power had still been cut off. They provided a school bus full of people with squeegees and equipment. It was amazing. They built a little mountain of floor blowers out in the parking lot. So I bet we had 50 people with squeegees and floor blowers, and they had, and once the mud and the water was squeegeed out, that's what our floor looked like. That's not our image, but that's exactly what it looked like. And it was slippery. I had to move crates and pallets out of the way, and it was hard to negotiate. The floor was so slippery, the forklift was sliding around. Also not my image, but that's essentially what we had. And it looks like they've got a little bit of current going on with the ripples in the water. Here's a school bus full of people, and with squeegees just like this. So a 52,000 foot warehouse is squeegeeing everything. So I would move crates and pallets out of the way. They would squeegee behind it, and everything went out the loading dock doors. As Belfour was cleaning, we discovered these bolts. So there were many 1-inch bolts that had sheared off during the roof collapse, and I imagine were flying around the room as the roof collapse was happening. And we found a lot of these in the mud in the low bay space of the building. I keep a number of these on my desk as a reminder of, I don't know, be prepared. Another image, it's roughly the same image that I showed you before, just showing the pile of mud outside. They had to pack, once they repaired the roof, in order to rebuild the cinder block wall, they had to pack sand back into the void underneath the concrete slab. And so this is the repaired warehouse. You can tell a difference in the roof color. So they just sort of took a rectangular section and completely re-roofed that area. And of course, the wall is brand new as well. So that's the upshot of my disaster story. So lessons learned: be prepared by keeping everything up off the floor. Of course, if we would have had 6 inches of water, we would have had problems, but we didn't. We had 2 inches of water. Also, having Belfour Environmental on speed dial was amazing. By noon the next day, oh my gosh, we had a lot of cleanup underway. This whole process with state insurance, History Colorado is a state, it's a state historical society. It's state funded, so we had to go through the state process of procurement and insurance. So this whole reparation process probably took 9 months. For a good 4 months, we just had a 2x4 and plastic wall up to protect against the weather. We rehired a security presence to do rounds to protect against somebody breaking in or theft or whatever, or other potential leaks. One other thing is, with your fire suppression system, if you've got a dry pipe system, it's probably full of crud. So if you have a pipe break, you're going to have this black ooze spray everything that's around that pipe break. And we had, like, all of our carriages, all of our vehicles were splattered with this black goo. but apparently it wasn't a problem for conservators. We sent them all off to a conservation outfit, and they were able to clean and restore all of those. So I'm going to open it up for questions now. And Megan, should I leave the slides up if folks want to reference slides?
Yeah, go ahead and leave up the slides.
Okay, all right.
People can put questions in the chat, or they can unmute and ask the question directly to you, whatever people prefer.
Okay.
Did you ever find out what caused the water main break?
Well, so this is a 1960s building. We bought an old building. And the cause was deterioration of an 8-inch water main underneath the building. And there's no real way to do an inspection underneath the concrete slab. So I guess there's, if we had bought a new building, this wouldn't have happened, but we weren't in a situation where we could pay for a brand new building. Looks like we've got a question. How did you handle the temperature and humidity with the wall being open? Did you have to move collections out of the space? Okay, good question. So everything, so going into the building, we had encapsulated nearly everything in stretch wrap. So you had objects in boxes, and so in their own little environment. Oftentimes we used acid boxes with an acid-free interior. So many like ceramics and well, a lot of things had an ethafoam enclosure. Then you had the box, and then the boxes were encapsulated in stretch wrap. We also used triple wall big boxes, pallet-sized boxes with a container, and those were stretch wrapped. Denver is very dry, especially in September. So we opened up all the doors and just vented the whole thing. And it was amazing how quickly the space dried out. If it would have been a problem had we not caught it when we did. But we did, we did some investigating and didn't find any mold problems at all. And did you have to move collections out of the space? No. We had to shift crates around. We had to shift like all the pallets that were on the lower rack, had to move those away so the people with squeegees could get around and clear the mud out. And then another crew came through and cut the first 6 inches of drywall around all the office spaces. Anywhere where drywall was wet, they just cut out the old stuff to let the walls breathe. And then, I don't know, a couple months later, they had a crew come in and patch those walls. But only in the American West could this, could you take advantage of very low humidities like this? If this happened here in Minnesota, I think it would be a much different story.
Todd, I'm wondering about how the collapsed roof was removed from the cars without damaging the cars. Like, that must have been a lot of collaboration between like construction crews and collection staff.
Yeah, it was mostly us explaining what they had to work with, and we're just standing a distance away watching them. They took beams, metal beams with jacks, like they would straddle like the cars and put a metal beam over the top and then jack the roof up. And then we would take a pallet jack or a forklift and slowly move. So all the vehicles were on conveyances of some kind. They were on big pallets or on dollies. So they were pretty easy to move once the roof weight was off. And we had already moved, we had already cleared that side of the warehouse. So we gave the construction guys a lot of space to move around. And there was also another danger. So that area that the vehicles lined, basically that discolored, where you see the new roof line going in, that whole area was a line of vehicles. All of the soil underneath the concrete slab had eroded away in one big hydrologic explosion. So the engineers were warning us not to step out where the vehicles were because that whole concrete slab could break off. And then the vehicles would just tumble into the alley. Luckily, that didn't happen. So we were very, very, very lucky. We did a few good things in preparation, but in the end, we were just extremely lucky that it wasn't worse than it was.
Yeah, one thing that I am really interested in is that you chose initially to keep everything 4 inches up off the floor. And I was thinking, I don't know this for sure, but isn't like the common recommendation like 2 inches off the floor?
Oh yeah, but I've been in enough water disasters to know that's not enough.
So
and also it's not practical with as far as logistics, because a 2-inch, 2-inch cleats on crates won't allow you to get a pallet jack underneath. So it allows mobility if you have pallet jackable pallets and crates, and it also gives you some safety with rising water.
mm-hmm.
We also went with plastic pallets. You saw some wooden crates in one of the slides, but for about I had 1,600 loaded pallets, and we used all plastic because I didn't want to introduce pests into the building, but that kind of also worked out with mud because the plastic pallets were easy to clean off and they didn't absorb any moisture. And the crates had pressure treated feet. So the feet didn't absorb, it didn't seem like they absorbed any water at all. And we didn't see any warpage in the crates either, which is great. I think venting the space, and those of you that haven't ever been to Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, I mean, a 15% humidity is not unheard of, and in the wintertime it can go down into the single digits. So humidity really wasn't a big concern. Bailey.
I just as I think clarification, how long was the timeline between when you called 911 and to when the structural engineers allowed you determine that the building was safe to re-enter?
It was mid-afternoon.
Okay, so it was just a matter of hours.
Yeah, it seemed like a longer time.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure. Well, it's
Yeah.
kind of amazing that then you were able to respond so quickly after.
Yeah. And Denver's not a hard city to navigate. So even people that lived across town could quickly drive over, and we were so close to the police department and also the fire department, so that response was very fast. The only response that was irritating was the city water department, because they had to bring out one of those wands where they have to wand the street to figure out where the shutoff is for the water. So for 2 or 3 hours. The water just sort of kept gushing while we waited for the city to find the shutoff. Grant says, what was the public response like? Did the museum see a spike in support? Oh, that's a great question. We kept it very quiet. The public didn't know. So this is in an industrial part of North Denver. We had already taught our PR and marketing people and our administration, like, we don't want this to get out. We don't want onlookers. We don't want people to drive by to check us out. So we remarkably kept it very quiet. There was no PR, positive or negative. We got a lot of great response from the museum community. If we had wanted 300 people to show up to help, we could have easily gotten that. But luckily, we didn't. We relied on our own staff. We brought in people from other departments that helped collections and curatorial. But because we didn't have any damage aside from a few vehicles, we would really just relied on the contractors to do the cleanup. So basically, my job was just to wander around and watch what they're doing and to move stuff from out of their way. So we ran shifts between me, the registrar, the assistant registrar, some curators. We kind of ran shifts to kind of, provide access and to monitor what was going on. Yeah, it does make sense.
Did you have a collections disaster plan in place at the museum, or were you sort of winging it?
We did, but because we had spent years packing and moving, and the collections disaster plan did not reflect this new building or even the new History Colorado Center. So I guess I should say no. We did have a plan, but we just didn't have the time yet to make it match our new facilities. So no, we were just sort of winging it with using basic principles as we entered the building.
Yeah, it just goes to show how important it is to keep the plans up to date. But you had, those contacts with Belfour and stuff already figured out. So
yeah, and honestly, that's I wish I could take credit for that, but our security team had already had an agreement with Belfour, and there are other companies, other disaster response companies out there. It's just so happens that we used Belfour. I think Veolia Environmental also does that too. But having a company like that is just amazing. And what they do is they direct bill your insurance. So you have an agreement ahead of time where they've already approved your insurance. You just call them up and they do their thing. A great tabletop exercise topic. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, our challenge was to keep up with the contractors because they, imagine that, the company brings in a busload of people, and they were probably temp people, but all with tools and equipment, and you have to accommodate them with access to your spaces. And they're working as fast as you can stay ahead. So Megan, going back to your question about, so what did work with our previous emergency plan was the calling tree, and that did work. So the security guy receives a call from local law enforcement. He calls me as the collections manager. I show up on site. I assess the situation, and then I called our COO, the registrar, and then they call other people. And so that really did work. Adam Smith, how did you practice self-care during the disaster? I'm thinking, how did you keep yourself or others of your team from burnout and high stress? That's another great question. So food became an issue. So our facilities staff showed up unasked with bags of burritos, which was wonderful because that's part of self-care is making sure you eat enough, and nobody had really thought about that, and that's really should be part of the disaster plan too. And they just sort of intuited that the people on the ground are probably hungry. Let's bring breakfast burritos and coffee, and that was a wonderful thing. So another method is we ran in shifts. So I think that first day I probably worked 12 hours on site, and until the contract security guy came in. But then days later, we just sort of rotated out and divvied up the work. If you're going to have a disaster, have this kind of disaster where you have a great story to tell, but you're not talking about the loss of thousands of objects. Okay, anything else? I would say, we thought we thoroughly vetted this warehouse when we went shopping. There are warehouses with skylights. There were warehouses with 25, 30 dock doors. We thought we bought like the perfect place, but just buyer beware. There are certain infrastructure and systems things that you can't inspect. So just know if you're buying a 50, 60-year-old building, you're going to have 50 or 60-year-old systems.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much for talking to us about your experience. Thanks everyone for coming and asking good questions. I will stop the recording now.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was fun.